Hi, you're right. Welcome back to our video tutorial lessons and to our first lesson for biology in term 3. So in this video, we're going to actually be looking at some stuff that you guys have already learnt in class. So the two objectives we're going to be covering are defining prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells, and also learning about the differences between these two types of cells. So I know a lot of you have already done this, and you should hopefully already know what those words mean. But remember, the more times that you listen to this, the more times you read the information or maybe even write notes about it, the more likely that you're going to remember it. Throughout this biology topic, we have a lot of new words, so it's really important that we keep revisiting these words and using the right vocabulary so that you guys will be able to communicate your understandings properly when we come to a test or to a practical. So the first objective is pretty self-explanatory. It's just defining these two terms. It's obviously going to be something that you put onto your flashcards. But I thought I'd start off by showing you how to write, a good definition that you're going to be able to understand and also remember. Because I noticed last term a lot of you, when you wrote flashcards, just typed something into Google and then copy and pasted that definition. All right, so let's start off with the eukaryote. So this is when I typed the word eukaryote into Google. This is what came up. So eukaryote is any organism whose cells contain a nucleus and other organelles enclosed within membranes. They belong to the taxon Eukarya or Eukaryota. So if I take out my highlighter pen now, just give me a second. All right, so the important points in this definition are an organism made up of cells, contain a nucleus, and organelles enclosed within membranes. So if we put that into our own words, it's going to look something like this. Eukaryotic cells contain a nucleus and membrane-bound organelles. Very simple. That's all that you need. So now I want you guys to have a go at writing your own definition for prokaryotic cells. So read through the definition from Google, pause the video for a sec, and have a go at writing it. So here we go with our keywords. So they are, you could say single-celled. They lack a membrane-bound nucleus and any other membrane-bound organelles. That would be all you'd need for this one. So our definition might look something like this. A prokaryotic cell is a cell that does not have a nucleus or membrane-bound organelles. So I'd say pause your video now and write these down. So on to the next objective, to know the difference between prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. So let's get our definitions back up here. Yeah, I'll just drag one here and I'll drag another one here. All right, so already from your definitions, you can see a few differences. But what I want you really to look at here is these two images. So here's the eukaryotic cell and here's the prokaryotic cell. Which one looks simpler? Okay, hopefully you're answering this one, the prokaryotic. There's not as many bits inside it, okay? It doesn't have all of these organelles that the eukaryotic cell has. So they're very, very simple cells. You can think of it as being like prokaryotic is like primitive. It's a very primitive type of cell. So what does that mean in terms of biology? Well, let me show you. So here's a good question. The first cells were probably were lonely, so it's not really the worst answer, but they were probably more likely to be prokaryotes. All right, so we'll put this image over this one. Prokaryotic cell is very, very simple, so it's likely that they were the first cells to be able to evolve. Now, the fact that these prokaryotic cells are more simple means they're more likely to be unicellular, which basically means they're a little bit lonely and they live by themselves. Whereas eukaryotic cells are much more likely to be multicellular. So that means there's a whole lot of cells that all exist in the same area and they kind of work as a team in order to function as one larger organism. So this would just be like humans. We're made up of trillions of eukaryotic cells that all have different functions in order to help us to survive as a total multicellular organism. And this idea of multicellular organisms brings us to the next question. How do you hold a multicellular organism? Eukaryote. I'm sorry, that was a bad one. I hope no one switched off after that joke. But let's continue. So let's look at this diagram here. I want to start by thinking about what is similar about the cells. So what do these two types of cells both have? So pause the video now and see if you can jot down the similarities. So in terms of similarities, what you hopefully should have seen is that both of these types of cells have a membrane. They both have cytoplasm. We'll go more into what cytoplasm is a little bit later. Both of them have DNA. So remember, DNA is like your instruction manual. So it's like a book that the cell can read in order to figure out what it needs to be doing in order to function. And the last thing they both have is ribosomes. So these are the things that make protein for the cell. And again, later on we'll go a little bit more into detail into what ribosomes are and why they're important. All right, now I want you to stop for a second and see what can you see from this diagram that tells you some differences between the cells. So the first difference that I hope you've seen is the size. All right, so here's a scale down here. So prokaryotic cells are much smaller than eukaryotic cells. Another difference is that only eukaryotic cells have a nucleus. So a nucleus is kind of like the brain of the cell. That's where the DNA is kept within a eukaryotic cell, and it helps to tell the rest of the cell what it needs to be doing. The final thing you can see that isn't actually labelled, but the eukaryotic cell is full of all these different organelles. So that's something that our prokaryotic cell doesn't have. Again, later on we'll go more into detail about what these organelles are and what they do and how they help the cell. But for now, I just want you to remember that organelles are like tiny organs that are within the cell. So you can imagine our bodies have different organs such as your heart, your lungs, your brain. And a eukaryotic cell is the same. So they have these kind of on miniature scale and they've got different names and different functions. All right, time to summarize these differences between prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. So you can see here are two images, so you should be able to recognize which image represents which type of cell. So the image on the left is the prokaryotic cell, the simpler cell, and the image on the right is the eukaryotic, or the, I guess, the more complex cell. I'm going to start off by putting in all of our points that both of the cells have. So both types of cells are going to have DNA, cell membrane to keep everything within the cell, cytoplasm, and also ribosomes. However, the differences are, let's start with the prokaryotic one. So the prokaryotic were the first to evolve. They were primitive. They're unicellular, and they also have no nucleus and no organelles. So remember, they're very, very simple. A good way to remember this is pro rhymes with no. So prokaryote, no organelles, no nucleus. All right, and on to our eukaryotes. So they are multicellular. So they often live, I guess, together in large groups and they work as a team to make larger organisms. They do have a nucleus and they do have organelles. So another way to remember this is U rhymes with do. So eukaryotes do have a nucleus and do have organelles. Another thing that helps me remember about eukaryotic cells is to remember that you are eukaryotic. It's a good memory trigger for me. Okay, so if we now go back to look at our actual learning objectives, it says we need to know the differences between prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. Key word here is the differences. So a really good way to highlight the differences is when you're putting these into study notes is to present them as a Venn diagram. So a couple of things here I've done in order to make these I guess visually appealing, so you'll actually want to look at them and want to learn from them, and also to help it kind of stick in your mind. Firstly, it's laid out as a Venn diagram, so we can see we've got our similarities in the middle and our differences on the outside. I've used different colours, so the green represents things that both cells have, and the red is things that only prokaryotes or eukaryotes have. And also I've put an image in. So diagrams are really important in your study notes. So if I was going to be making notes from this video, this is the type of thing that I'd want to be writing down in my notes. I wouldn't just write pages and pages trying to copy down what I've just said. This is what we're aiming for.